Amy, hi, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So excited to share some of your wisdom with my followers. This is going to be a great conversation all about compensation, which is like obviously a big topic for people. So I'm curious if we could start, Amy. One of the things I think about, and there's this trend happening in the workforce of more interest in the trades, right? We're moving
Mhm.
away from this, like, we have to have these higher degrees. And especially from Gen Z, they are very interested in the trades. So that means we're going to have more trainings and certifications along their employment versus all the way at the beginning, right? So instead of a worker coming in with that education that we thought would cover all things, workers may need to be learning over time. So I'm curious, how do you think compensation trends are going to respond to that more skills-based hiring and development?
Honestly, I think when you're hiring folks who are coming through the trades, I mean, you're getting more practical skills out of the gate than you're getting with a degree program. Degree programs a lot of times are teaching theoretical and hypothetical things versus the trades, you get very hands-on. So it is going to be interesting to see how compensation adjusts for that. I think a part of it is a recruiting adjustment, the recognition by companies that a four-year degree doesn't mean necessarily the same thing it used to mean. Maybe we don't need to have that as a limiting factor for hiring folks. But I think we're going to see where it's a one for a one on that, because I don't think that you're going to see that, oh, well, you came through the trades route, you should be compensated less. That to me doesn't make a ton of sense. And I can give you an example even within technology as well. We hired our first engineer here. He didn't have a computer science degree. He had gone through what is essentially trade training, in technology. He had gone through General Assembly and had done a boot camp and done all of that. And I paid him what I'd pay any engineer I was hiring at the time, because he came in with other skills as well that were not just a four-year degree of skills. And so I think we're seeing this across industry where there's a recognition. It's not that college isn't worth what it's not that it's not worth something, but there's other ways to get skills as well.
Yeah. And there's leaders out there who I think are going to be thinking about the development, like the phases, Amy.
Mhm.
So when we have a role, like a job that is sort of phased over time from a skill development perspective, how
Mhm.
should we be thinking about that from like an overall compensation perspective?
Well, I think it should be falling under professional development, which most companies have some sort of a budget for, that goes massively unutilized, because you could throw this money at employees and like, hey, here's some money for professional development. They're like, literally, what am I going to use that for? Maybe I don't need an advanced degree. Maybe I don't have time to get an advanced degree. Maybe that means nothing for where my career is going. And so I mean, companies are allocating funds towards this. That's just going to make it a lot more practical for employees to apply those funds to their own kind of trajectory. One of the things that I am hearing from hospitality in particular is moving towards skills-based compensation rather than looking at, just merit-based compensation or, tenure-based compensation, to where it's like for each skill you get, that can drive you up into a new bracket, a new pay bracket. And so I think that's something that we're going to see trending in clean energy and manufacturing as well.
Yeah, and we're really talking about those micro credentials, right? Like they stack
Exactly.
on top of each other. So we're going to need to be thinking about that from a compensation and a reward perspective. So I love that.
Absolutely.
One of the things with compensation, everybody wants to know how they can be competitive. Like my theory is maybe our employees may never be totally happy with their compensation. Maybe they'll always want more. But like I do believe there's an approach that we can have that makes us more competitive. What is today's talent looking for from a competitive compensation package?
Well, I think there's the how it's designed, but it's also how it's communicated. Employees want to know that they're being paid fairly. They want to know that they are not sitting next to somebody doing the same exact job who is making a lot more than them. They want to know, like, that is causing a lot of stress. Like, the more companies try and be really opaque about this process, all you do is create angst and unhappiness, regardless of where someone is sitting in a pay compensation kind of band. So I think that transparency is key to taking down the temperature for employees of like, okay, I know my market rate. I can Google it. I know you're paying me in that range. I know everyone else here is being paid in that range. Suddenly you're a lot happier with your compensation, because if you were to leave and go to another similar company, you're going to be paid the same thing.
Yeah.
So that takes down the temperature a whole bunch. I think when you're looking at the compensation package, people are looking at not just salary, depending on the industry, depending on the type of company. Health insurance is obviously an expectation as well. But then it's the what else as companies try and compete against each other. And it's usually smaller dollar things that we're seeing happen. This could be where professional development comes in. We've seen that even with like Amazon and Walmart and Target, they have these budgets they're putting out there for even entry-level employees where they're like, hey, we're going to pay for some of your school if you'll come in and take this role. And I'm sure there's all kinds of caveats on how long you have to be there and all the things, but they're trying to make that leap. I think there's also the lifestyle benefits, which is where we've seen companies really try and lean in as well. So things like wellness, mental health, looking at family budgets. There's a lot of discussion around the what's the term I'm looking for? It's the acronym is SDOH. It's the determining factors of health. And so it's
social
things.
determinants of health. Yep.
Yes, thank you. And so it's folks looking at, all right, maybe some people on my team have food insecurity and they don't want to tell me, because who wants to talk to their boss and be like, I have food insecurity? And so companies are looking at ways to support that without diving into the weeds, but giving employees some extra coverage. And usually that's at most $1,000, $1,500 extra a year at most, but it still just takes a little bit more stress off of the employees. And so we see that as a competing factor as well.
Yeah. And I've been a huge fan for a long time of total rewards, thinking about it from
Yes,
your total reward.
absolutely.
Can you talk to our audience, like, what does that mean to be thinking about it from a total rewards perspective and communicating it that way, which I know is one of your points?
Yeah, it is. And so, I mean, the rest, your salary is a component, and it's obviously the one that employees look at first and they think about, and that's the one that they negotiate or try and negotiate the hardest. But there's, a lot of times the rest of the package is 40 to 50% of their compensation. So I don't want employees to be like, oh, well, I don't like the salary. And you're like, but look at everything else. Like, we're paying a ton for your health insurance that other companies may not. We have professional development. We have, all these other things. So it's making sure that it's not just giving an employee, here's your salary range, here's what you're going to get. It's looking at that total compensation package, communicating it. The way I do it is in the, we're very transparent about salary, because out of the gate, you have to have a base salary that is within a range of what they'd be expecting from other companies as well. So you can't go low on salary and then be like, but look at all the shiny benefits. You still got to pay your rent. And so you got to come in at a baseline. But then when we go through the offer process, I have a little spreadsheet that actually calculates out all the rest of their benefits, so they can see, sure, your salary may be $75,000, but your total compensation for the year is actually about 130, 140,000. That's a big difference. And it gives them something, if they're comparing offers, to be like, oh, what else do I plug in from these other companies? And do I get paid as much overall? And so trying to create that. And then that goes directly into my offer letters.
Yeah, two things. Pro tip on total rewards that I really always valued our total rewards team, sending it directly to the house. When you send it directly to the house, they're more likely to talk with their family about their total rewards, which spreads the enjoyment of that. I work at this organization. So instead of sending it to them at work, send it to them at home. Second thing I want to talk about, transparency. You mentioned transparency. How are you feeling about this movement to have all of our salaries be transparent?
I love it. I think it starts, it shouldn't be some sort of taboo thing. The only reason for it to be taboo and quiet is that somebody is making a lot of money and doesn't want other people to know it. And there's a disparity happening there, or there's pay gaps in an organization. I am all for pay transparency. Every single person on my team knows exactly what I make. Every single person on this team knows where they sit relative to their fellow employees, because it's just part of working, and it shouldn't be some sort of hidden thing. Yes, the engineers are making more than the marketing folks. You're in a different field. That's okay. But you need to know that relative to what you could be doing elsewhere, you are being compensated fairly. So I'm a huge fan of pay transparency, because I think that's the only way to eliminate pay gaps. And when companies are having to deal with knowing that every single person is very aware of what they make, they're talking about it, everybody knows this. You can't go with this like, well, we'll adjust pay gaps over time. Why does an employee have to make less at some point in time? If you can't afford to pay everyone fairly and not discriminate against people, maybe you should relook your entire model.
Yeah. Does it change if you've got a company, like I work with a lot of clean energy companies, so we've got blue collar workers, we've got the
Yeah.
office staff. Should the transparency change when we have a setup like that, or does it stay
Yeah.
the same?
I think it's the same, honestly, because one, you could have somebody going from salary to hourly or back and forth, and it I think it doesn't do hourly employees the justice and the dignity of recognizing that they are grown ups. Like they can handle big kid conversations. And if they
Mhm.
want to be in a different path, there is a path for that. Not to mention a lot of hourly employees make a ton of cash. And so there's
Yeah.
going to be salaried employees who make less than an hourly employee as well. But I think that just because you're compensated in a specific way, keeping time or not keeping time, yeah, I'm all for salary transparency. And in some ways, there's more transparency in the hourly side already. There's hourly rates that are posted because that's how they're recruiting people. I think the idea that, salaries are hidden and somehow like a secret, like then maybe our compensation structure is off. Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I
I
think, right. I think a lot of it has to do with like CEO pay has ballooned.
totally has to do with CEO pay, like 100%. When they're making 85 times, what the lower level employees are, it doesn't make sense. And like, that's
Yeah.
where, but I think that's where salary transparency, when you are doing the right things, I make the exact same amount as everyone else on my leadership team. We're all less, like, lower compensated compared to what we could make in the market. All of like my exact team is the only one that is taking a pay cut. Everyone else is paid market.
Wow.
But by staying transparent about that, even though we make more than everyone else on the team, there is a general understanding and clarity of like, okay, everyone is not just here working to make me wealthy. That's not the way this is going to go. That's not the type of organization we're building. We're all in this together.
Mm. Say it louder for the people in the back. Like, yes, that is right. And by the way, Economic Policy Institute found that CEO pay has skyrocketed by 1,460% since 1978. Seriously, that's just like, we're going
And
over.
it just doesn't make sense to me, because when you look at the contributions by those individuals, it's not that they don't have contributions. Of course they do. But the disparity just doesn't make sense when you've got somebody making millions and millions of dollars in some of these companies, and then it's a massive step down to the next level. Like, what is that person doing that is so special and unique that they need to be making so much more than everyone else? And you have to rely in a lot of cases on lower paid hourly workers that are making, not living wages. They're not even making a living wage. Like, if your team is not making a living wage, then what are you doing? Like, people should be able to work 40 hours a week and have a living wage. Like, now you got me on a soapbox. Look what you did.
You can be up on that soapbox. There are a lot of disparities, right? I mean, especially when we look at, even with clean energy, we look at a lot of seasonal and regional workers who end
Right.
up, some of them even being paid in cash. So there's a lot of disparities that are
Staff
happening.
work. How does
Yeah,
bag of cash work? I don't know that the IRS is a big fan.
I know. So I'm curious, let's talk about that for a second. I know clean energy is a little complicated because it's
Yeah.
got a lot of layers, but like, what do you think the unique challenges are when we look at setting compensation in something like a clean energy sector compared to maybe traditional manufacturing?
I mean, you do have, I mean, it's a little bit more of the Wild West. I mean, manufacturing is a very, it's been around a long time. It's a much older, like, tried and true, like, set of industries. It's obviously manufacturing isn't one thing, but
Yeah.
there's a path and an expectation for people who work in traditional manufacturing. Salary ranges, compensation structures, even that we're seeing move now, because people can bounce between sectors, and that's been really interesting to see. But I think clean energy sits in the middle of kind of like, manufacturing, but also kind of tech. And those are
Yeah.
very different compensation structures. And so that creates honestly, I think it creates room for advancement for the entire industry as you have folks that can now go between different industries. And if you have something that's sitting between tech, which is very highly compensated, and manufacturing, where you just don't have access to the benefits and the structures and the acceptance of just people movement, the idea that somebody works for 20 years in a tech company is not so much a thing. Manufacturing, you can still find that. And so clean energy sits in the middle of that, I think. And that's going to change the way the entire industry kind of approaches compensation. But especially as this younger generations come through, their work expectations are going to be very different as well, because they're moving around a lot more.
Yeah. I don't know, Amy, if you saw this, but there was just a report, I'll put it in the comments when we share the video, but there was just a report from high school students about their interest level, like in careers, and tech is going down. Tech
Absolutely.
is going down. Now, a couple of them, like they fell maybe like 2 or 3 slots. Facebook fell to like 80 or 94, if I remember, like it's all the way at the bottom of the list. Now that might be reputation, but we've got an advantage in clean energy for the clean tech.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
we're offering technology in a field where today's candidates want to be part of something bigger, want to have a purpose in their work. Clean energy has a built-in meaning maker, that we could sell that.
Absolutely. Like clean energy, I think, is a super interesting place for folks that like just environmental factors, looking at climate change. These are things that the younger generations in particular, I mean, they're feeling the effects of this not having been dealt with my generation. And so they want to affect change in that. That's a lot more interesting than going into the cesspool that is social media, where it's just like, I can't deal with my mom on that right now. Like, plenty of people are like, it's becoming a place where it's like, it's not cool anymore. It's got, so much toxicity, especially in an election year, so much toxicity. We all know that it's been hacked by God knows how many people, putting just whatever incendiary things. That doesn't drive purpose in life. Whereas
Right.
if you can go into clean energy and you're like, look, I can actually impact change across the world, that drives meaning. And you can do that in a way where you are leveraging technology, obviously, because you're going to need to.
Yeah.
And have this, it's not a not-for-profit, although some of them are nonprofits. It's a for-profit in a lot of cases, but you will also still get to do good in the world. And I think a lot of people would like to have that. You want to
Yeah.
have something that has meaning
Yeah.
in the work that you're doing. You want to be able to add something good to the world rather than just, use technology to get wealthy.
Right, right. You're speaking to my hippie heart.
I
There,
know.
even in that report, Amy, there was a part of it that asked them what life experience motivated their choices in career. And
Mm,
they were labeling things like bullying,
yep.
climate change, racial inequality, like Generation Z, like we're
Yes.
talking all this stuff about them, but they are driven. They want to be
Yes.
part of making change happen.
Yep. Well, I think there's a different association with some of the more traditional things for X and boomers, where it's like, look, education wasn't as expensive for us. Buying a house was a lot easier for us. A lot of things that were a lot easier for our generations are just not even an option for some of the younger generations with the structures that we have out there. And so they're taking a very different look at the world and have a very different perspective of what, the American dream looks like, what they are going to have access to. And that's where they're focused more on different types of change, because that's where they're going to be able to have an impact. And so I think I'm excited for them to take over, quite frankly, because I think it's a long overdue, much needed change.
Yeah, agreed. I want to take a look as we wrap up at like sort of trends. So if we look backward, what have you sort of been seeing trend in the manufacturing area over the last few years related to compensation?
Personalization is key. So you've
Yeah.
got all the traditional kind of compensation routes. You've got obviously salary, health insurance, things like HSAs that are out there, dependent care sometimes. So you have that, but because there's been movement of people between industries, you're starting to see some of the things that were in, tech usually runs the front edge of, hey, let's try some new stuff. And that's where you're seeing personalized compensation, specifically around lifestyle benefits, where people are saying, look, don't give me a wellness benefit that is the one gym that happened to be somewhere convenient for someone, but not convenient for me. Like that doesn't help my wellness. And so seeing how manufacturing is actually applying the concept, but in a much more holistic way is pretty cool to see, because tech companies brought in lots and lots of companies. Here's your menu of 8,000 things you can have access to, and it's very overwhelming and nobody uses any of it. Manufacturing is like, do you think I'm bringing yoga on site? Like that's not going to happen. Like I can't even do that on our floor. It's not safe. And so they're taking a more holistic approach and saying, all right, we want to support your wellness, but why don't you be you are a grown up, you determine what wellness means for you, and here's how we're going to support you in that. So that's been really cool to see. That started trending over the last like 3 years is what we noticed, where there's been this movement towards more lifestyle benefits, stipends, things like that.
That's great. And now can we look forward, maybe at like some predictions for compensation in the manufacturing industry, maybe in the next couple of years? What do you think we'll see?
I think we're going to see almost a total adoption of the personalization piece, because people are not staying in one company, in one industry their entire career anymore. And so with that movement, you get new ideas, you get new expectations. And so manufacturing tends to move very slowly with change and a lot of like HR structures. I think we're going to see that accelerate. I think we'll see a lot of new tools on the HR side outside of, compensation, yes, but also how HR is just managed in general, as those folks are getting access to the tools that a lot of other industries are leveraging for things like performance management, professional development. I think is going to change, to our earlier conversation around working more with the trades. Like all of that is going to be an influx. And I think we're going to see a huge kind of revamp on how professional development is happening in particular.
Good. I'm here for it.
Yeah, me too.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I hope that this has been helpful for leaders. Where can people get in touch with you and follow along on your journey?
They can find us on our website, compt.io, or reach out to me, Amy at compt.io. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn as well, Amy Spurling.
Thanks, Amy. This has been awesome.
Thanks so much.